they should consider other alternative of using this force. We achieved a lot, but at this point, it just doesn't work anymore.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end.
Right now, all eyes are on Washington. But who's actually watching Europe at the moment?
And the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says the death toll in Gaza is now more than 60,000 people since the start of the war.
I'm Venetia Rainey, and this is Battle Lines. It's Monday, 4th of August, 2025. Welcome back. We're returning to our usual format again this week. Last week we ran our special 3-part series on the rise of China's military and what it means for Taiwan. Do go back and listen to it if you haven't already, and if you have, we'd love to hear what you think. But a lot has happened in the past week in the Middle East. 3 major Western countries deciding to recognise a Palestinian state, growing condemnation of the unfolding famine in Gaza, Trump's envoy in Israel, and fresh ceasefire talks. So on today's episode, we're going to be digging into all of that. We're going to start with the most recent news from the conflict. Shocking new videos of 2 of the Israeli hostages being held in Gaza, showing the awful conditions they're in. One released over the weekend by Hamas shows a skeletal Eviatar David in a small, dark tunnel. He says he hasn't eaten for days and has barely any drinking water. He's later seen digging what he describes as his own grave. The other was released last week by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, showing Rom Braslavsky crying and writhing on the ground in pain. He says he can't stand and has run out of food and water. They're just 2 of the 50 hostages left in Gaza out of the 250 who were kidnapped by Hamas and other militant groups on October 7th. At least 20 of those hostages are believed to be alive. I'm joined now by Gili Roman. He's part of the Israeli community campaigning to get all of those hostages out of Gaza. Gili's sister Yarden Roman Gat was among the first group of hostages freed from Gaza in November 2023. His sister-in-law, Carmel Gat, was also kidnapped on October 7th, but she did not make it out alive. Her body was recovered from a tunnel last September, reportedly murdered along with 5 other hostages shortly before they were discovered. Gili, thank you very much for joining me on Battle Lines. I'm sure you've seen the videos, and I'm very sorry to start with such a grim question given your very personal connection to this story, but what did you make of them?
To be completely honest, I'm still horrified by these images. It's heartbreaking. When I saw them, my first thought was, what if it was my sister in this situation? We were lucky enough to get her back almost 2 years ago. But if she stayed there, which was optional, she would either lose her life like her sister-in-law Carmel or get to this situation. So just imagining myself in the shoes of these families, which some of them I know pretty well. It's horrific. And I think that maybe it's easier for me to view these scenes from a personal perspective if every single person around the globe who is watching is willing to watch, because I know many people are not willing to watch or to publish even these images, and can put themselves into the shoes of that person or as the family member. So you understand this is super painful and truly horrifying, because you see someone who is on the verge of dying.
Yeah, they are awful videos, and it's propaganda, of course. Normally when Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad release these sorts of videos, and they have happened regularly over the last few years, the families asked them not to be shared, not to be published by media outlets, but the families did want these videos to be shared. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think that the families want to brutally saying to shake the world, our government, our public, but also the international public. I believe that they thought it will get to more people who don't understand Hamas attitude towards the hostages and the level of risk that they're into, because people are asking us to end the war. And I hear that from October 23, end the war, without mentioning the hostages and their situation at all. So I think that for many people around the globe, it would be enough for us just to stop fighting and forget about our people with the hope that Hamas will be kind enough to release them. That will not happen. There is no kindness. There is only cruelty and very cynically using them as bargaining chips. I think for the vast majority of Israelis that want to see both things happening, the war ending and the hostage being released, this is something that the families want to promote around the world so people understand we have to save these people.
There were huge rallies in Tel Aviv on Saturday. Did you go to them?
Yes, of course.
What was the mood like there? What were people saying?
I think it's a combination of close to despair with a lot of agony, pain, and a sense of urgency. We don't know exactly what we can do. It's not really in our hands, but we are trying to raise our voices. We are doing this for almost 2 years now. And it's also maybe important to note that many of us have also been to the streets the year before the war to fight for our democracy. And now we are fighting for our lives and for our families and to the survival of our nation. We are at the streets almost for 3 years, every week, sometimes every day, because even in the most desperate times, we need to raise our voices and get together in order to say what we want. And as I said, we want our hostages back. We want to save lives. We want to see the suffering in Gaza ends. And of course, we want to see our security. We want to see the end of the Hamas regime in Gaza. And I think all of them can and should come hand in hand as one solution, as President Trump is suggesting now. And we are very thankful for his leadership, but also for this new direction that says enough with these partial deals. We need to get it all wrapped up, bring it to an end. I hope our government will adhere to that. And obviously, I hope that Hamas will adhere to it, because it seems that they don't have a very big interest to agree to these 3 terms.
I want to ask you about the negotiations in a second, but you mentioned that you're out on the streets fighting for the survival of Israel. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think that our survival as a nation is divided into 2 segments. So we have a crucial problem of defense and security. It's very clear that we have very cruel, vicious enemies around all of our borders. Some of them have been not crushed, but been very strongly harmed. One of our enemies, which is Hamas, that showed capability and mostly very strong will to hurt us, to murder, to kidnap, to rape us, is still insisting to remain in power. And this is a fight that we are still having, and we want to see how it can end in the way that we are more secure. But the second segment or part of our security as a nation is our values. And I think that we are a nation that values life, that cherishes their people. We are a very family-oriented nation. And for us, if somebody is in despair, obviously in acute need for rescue, leaving them behind is something that will break apart our society. And so for us to go out there, even just to support the families, like people support my family in the past, in the first year of the war, to support each other is to preserve the fabric of our nation. And the fabric of our nation is what helps us fight and help each other. And this is a very, very crucial part of the security of our nation.
Steve Witkoff, the US's special envoy to the Middle East, was at the protest on Saturday, and he spoke with the Missing Hostages Family Forum. Apparently had a very emotional meeting, and he said, according to a statement from the forum, that we now need to bring them all home, the hostages. We're very close to ending the war. Do you believe him?
I believe definitely his goodwill, his intentions, and also his devotion to this cause. I have to say I'm very impressed with the devotion of this administration, the willingness to invest and also to be present on ground. Ambassador Witkoff was here several times. He's always meeting with the families. He's very clear and vocal about this cause. I know it's also personal to him. I think it's also became very personal to the president. Whether we are close to this situation, this I'm very hesitant to say. Of course, it's my wish that he will be accurate about it, but we heard too many promises about this issue. And I think that we're in a very dangerous situation in which Hamas is benefiting from continuing the war. As much as the situation in Gaza will be deteriorated, Hamas will gain more. Because he's basically benefiting globally in the narratives, which is so important to Hamas, to delegitimize Israel. And so I'm very afraid we are getting farther from ending this episode and bringing people back. But I hope he knows things that I do not know.
Things have shifted a lot in the last few weeks, haven't they? The IPC declared that famine is unfolding in Gaza. We've had countries saying that they'll recognise Palestine as a state, either have now or will do in the future, some with conditions set like the UK. What's the mood in Israel? Does it feel like the country is becoming more isolated? That's the sort of story that's starting to unfold outside. But what does it feel like in Israel?
Yeah, I think that we do feel that there is an increased isolation towards us, and our legitimacy as a state is being questioned. This is not new, but I think that the voices are becoming stronger. I think also the fact that nations, leaders are deciding to declare their support of a Palestinian state in this point in time is very problematic to us, not necessarily because of the end goal itself, but because of the timing that is basically giving Hamas a very big gift, showing that the way to achieve any progress towards whatever goal, I personally don't believe Hamas wants a state, but that the way to get there is to act like they act as a terrorist group who basically torture their own people, not even mention what they've done to us. So if you're completely immune to anything that happens to your civilians, by that you get recognition of things that you desire from the international community. I think that is very dangerous. And relating to your prior question, it's getting us farther from the point that we all want to see, which is the end of the war.
Do you recognise the frustration from Israel's international allies, places like the UK that are normally staunch pro-Israel allies, the argument that they're doing this because they don't know what else they can do to get through to Netanyahu?
Yeah, but I will have to divide my answer to this also to two parts. The first part is I think that the main role of the international community is not to pressure Netanyahu, is to find ways and leverages to pressure Qatar, Iran, and by them to pressure Hamas. This is something the international community is failing to do. Tremendous efforts could have been made since October 7th, 2 years ago. The UK prominently, but also other nations, were just failing this. They are failing us. This is something that is I see is unacceptable. And they have so much more that they can do. So at least they can try not to harm any efforts that we are trying to create and impose pressure on Hamas. In relation to pressuring our government, obviously I can relate to the need to pressure them. If you ask me personally, I think this is the worst government Israel ever had. And we are being ruled. Some of our governments are extreme radical politicians. But I'm not sure that international community job is to interfere with our politics and our democracy. But of course they can and they should express their discomfort and also to help find alternative solutions. I think that what our government is doing at the moment is a combination of devotion to radical ideas with a combination of just strategic failure, that even what they try to do doesn't make sense anymore. And I think that as allies, you need to try and pressure behind the scenes, not by giving gifts to the enemies of your ally, but trying to work with your ally. You can put a lot of pressure. I think that maybe some of the pressure that the European Union is trying to impose on Israel in different forms might be in somewhat of a direction, but still the main effort should be to work behind the scenes, to try to find solutions, to try to help Israel to get to the point that the international community think that is better at this point, but also to remember who should be pressured more. And I think that by accepting the fact that Iran mostly, but also Qatar, is backing Hamas and not pulling almost any strings which are hardcore pressure to make this organization to understand that either they will cave or perish, this is a great failure of the international community for almost 2 years. And I said many times, by the way, abroad and also in the UN, if you fail so drastically diplomatically, of course, the only possible alternative will be to use force. So if you don't know how to work against your enemies diplomatically, the only thing that we can use is force, and great force. And I think this is very unfortunate.
Is there a sense, though, that the use of force might have run out of its ability to bring about anything positive for Israel? The hostages, no more live hostages have been brought back since the last ceasefire. I know there are growing reports of suicides amongst IDF reservists. The fracturing of Israeli society seems to be growing.
Yeah, I think that your concerns are very accurate. And as I said, I think that even the more responsible figures in our government just lost track of decent strategy. There is always limitation to force. There is always the limitations to military actions. It became very, I would use like a maybe weird word, but very unsophisticated military operations at this point that are just playing to the hands of Hamas. It doesn't mean that we should one-sidedly end the war, because that will for sure empower Hamas both to attack us again, but to keep the hostages for many more years to come. There is no reason for them to release them otherwise. But they should consider other alternative of using this force, and they should be creative and they should be more strategic. This is not my expertise, but I think that as a nation we feel that maybe we achieved a lot, and in which we had great achievement in Gaza, but also in Lebanon and in Iran. But at this point, it just doesn't work anymore.
Gili Roman, thank you very much for joining us on Battle Lines. A reminder of the death tolls: 1,200 people were killed in Hamas's attack on October the 7th, 2023. And since then, in Israel's war in Gaza, about 60,500 people have been killed. That's according to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry. They also cite that amid the growing famine in Gaza, 175 people have been killed, including 93 children. Coming up after the break, should the West be recognising Palestine as a state right now? Welcome back. To get a bit deeper into this thorny question of recognising Palestine as a state, I'm joined in the studio by our chief foreign affairs commentator, David Blair. David, a lot has happened in the last few weeks. Can you just walk us through who exactly is recognising Palestine, under what conditions, and also just how significant is this?
France, Britain and Canada have all decided that they will recognise Palestine as a state, which is a very big shift in their policy. This is a move that they've been considering for many years. Their previous position was that they would recognise a Palestinian state, but in the context of a general peace agreement. Now they've decided to just proceed, although the British and the Canadians have set various conditions. And the reason why they've done that is they are exasperated with Israel's behaviour. They think that Israel has gone much too far with its military campaign in Gaza. They're particularly incensed with the blockade on aid that was enforced earlier this year, and the subsequent disruptions to aid deliveries, and the way that they believe this is now causing mass starvation in Gaza. Yes, Israel had a right to defend itself, but these countries, which traditionally have very friendly relationships with Israel, never believed that they would be asked to support measures that actually are causing or risking a famine. So they've decided to send a very clear signal. But the problem is that they want, on the one hand, to send that signal to Israel, but they don't want to embolden or reward Hamas. And striking that balance is proving to be very difficult.
And most Israelis think that this is a reward from Hamas, and that's from the Israeli government to people who still have family members kept hostage by Hamas. It's gone down like a lead balloon in Israel, right?
It has. And it's very interesting that the British strategy in particular was to balance their offer of recognition with a clear demand that Hamas would have to release its hostages and disarm. And what happened was, shortly after the British changed their position, the entire Arab League publicly called for Hamas to disarm and for its leaders to go into exile and leave Gaza. So you had both halves of the strategy seem to be working. But since then, Hamas has responded in a way which suggests that the British, French and Canadian move has indeed emboldened and encouraged them. So on Saturday, Ghazi Hamad, one of the Hamas leaders, gave an interview to Al Jazeera in which he said, referring to the terrorist attacks on October the 7th, 2023, he said that those attacks, I quote, yielded 3 very important historic achievements. And he went on to say, why are all these countries recognizing Palestine now? Had any country dared to recognize the state of Palestine prior to October the 7th? The overall outcome of October the 7th forced the world to open its eyes to the Palestinian cause. And then, after that, Hamas released a statement saying very clearly that they would not disarm, that they would not listen to the Arab League demand, and they would not give up any weapons until they have what they called the restoration of their national rights of the Palestinian people. First, and they say, and I quote, first and foremost, the establishment of a fully sovereign Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. Not much signs of flexibility there. Then both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad released very disturbing videos of hostages that they're holding. In one case, the case of the hostage held by Hamas, he was shown in an emaciated condition digging what he said was his own grave. So all of that suggests that Hamas have indeed been emboldened by the British, French, Canadian decision.
You've worked in the British government, you've worked in Number 10. What other options would the British government have had available to them to try and get through to Netanyahu amid this growing frustration over unfolding famine?
Very few is the short answer. And I think you put your finger on the single biggest reason why they made this decision, which was that it was clear that Netanyahu and his government were not listening, that they were impervious to all the previous efforts to get them to end the war in Gaza, and that this was the only way of getting their attention. But the problem is it creates the difficulty that you end up rewarding or emboldening Hamas or being seen to do those things. And the recent statements from Hamas suggest that exactly that is happening.
As you mentioned, some countries put different conditions on it. Which do you think has taken the sort of best approach? France has gone for an immediate recognition. Canada has put some conditions on Palestine holding elections next year, I believe. The UK wants Israel to end the war immediately and Hamas to release all the hostages. Has anyone got it right, if there is a way to get this right? I know you disagree with the timing in general of this.
Well, the key thing about the British conditions is that they apply only to Israel. And that's the key problem. They're not actually saying, we will recognize Palestine, but Hamas have to release the hostages first. That's not what they're saying. The conditions which concern reviving the peace process and having a ceasefire and all the rest of it really only apply to Israel. Canada has tried to do it in a slightly different way by setting conditions for the Palestinian side as well. And I think probably if you're going to do it, that's the best way of doing it. You should offer conditional recognition, and you should make sure the conditions apply to both sides. But the difficulty with that, of course, is that if you make the conditions impossible, then you're not really moving at all. So I can understand why the British government chose the position that it did. But the danger is that you end up with Hamas claiming that they've been rewarded. And unfortunately, a Hamas leader on Saturday made exactly that claim.
The mood music around the war in Gaza has shifted so much since those atrocities on October the 7th in 2023. As you say, most countries were very much in favour of Israel's right to self-defence at the beginning. But now, and we were speaking earlier to the relative of a woman who was taken hostage by Hamas and came out alive in the original ceasefire back in November 2023, he was saying that he sees that force has sort of reached its limit. And as we've mentioned, we're seeing famine unfolding, these endless reports of deaths at the Gaza Humanitarian Fund distribution points, aid drops, which are quite literally a drop in the ocean in some respects. Has the international community also come up to the limit of what it's capable of doing in terms of trying to stop this war?
Yes, all of the international community except America. America is really the only voice now that Netanyahu must listen to. Although even there, it's possible to exaggerate the extent of American influence. But the Americans still have the leverage that no one else has to try and get the Israelis to change their approach. It's also worth remembering, look at the debate within Israel. You now have a situation where just about every living former chief of staff or head of the Shin Bet or head of the Mossad have publicly signed a letter telling Netanyahu's government to end the war and end it now, which is an extraordinary thing. I'm not sure that's ever happened before in Israeli history. And you've got people who are not exactly doves signing this letter. You know, people who've been involved in just about every Israeli military operation of the last 50 or so years signing up to this letter. So it's pretty clear that there's plenty of people in Israel who want to see this end and want to see it end now.
As you mentioned, this letter was pretty extraordinary and included 600 retired Israeli security officials, including former heads of intelligence agencies. And it was written to Donald Trump, asking him to pressure Israel to end the war in Gaza. You said we shouldn't overestimate the leverage that the US has to tell Benjamin Netanyahu's government what to do. Why do you say that?
Netanyahu is a master of resisting international pressure from wherever it comes. And you have to ask the question, or he will ask the question, so what would the Americans really do, supposing he ignores them? You know, would they really cut off the flow of weapons? You know, the previous administration didn't do that. Even if the Americans did that, Israel is not exactly short of weaponry. You know, they would find the means to carry on the campaign from somewhere if they really needed to. Would America lift its protection of Israel in the UN Security Council and join the international criticism of Israel? Since when has Netanyahu particularly cared about what the UN Security Council thinks of Israel or about international criticism? They're very good at resisting these demands, even when they come from Washington. And actually, if you read Netanyahu's memoirs, which I would recommend, they're actually very well written. But one of the themes of his memoirs is the pressure that he's faced from successive American presidents. And he talks in great detail about his relationship, his very difficult relationship with Obama, but also back in the day when he was prime minister for the first time in the 1990s with President Clinton. And Netanyahu really has spent a big chunk of his career ignoring American presidents when he needs to. And there's no reason to suspect that that tradition will end. American presidents asking him to do what? Make peace with the Palestinians? Asking him to compromise here, compromise there, or, you know, in President Obama's case, asking him to shorten the previous war in Gaza in 2014, asking him to stop building settlements. That's usually been the big one. Obama once told Netanyahu to stop building any more settlements in the occupied territories, by which he meant, and this is Obama's phrase, not one more brick. Well, quite a lot more bricks have been laid since then, which just shows how that particular American demand was ignored. Just finally, I'm wondering this bigger picture. Do you feel like this conflict is eroding the rule of law, the international rule of law, in the respect that clearly crimes against humanity are being committed, were committed by Hamas on October the 7th, have been committed since then by Hamas, and are being committed by Israel? I'm not, obviously, an international war crimes lawyer, but that seems to be the widespread opinion, and I won't use the stronger words, which are also being levelled at Israel by courts and human rights organisations in Israel. But that language is out there, and those accusations are out there, and there is a sense that Israel is continuing to conduct this war anyway. Does that risk degrading this rules-based system that we conjured up out of nowhere post-World War II and relies on our sort of mutual reinforcement of it? To the extent that it ever really existed. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a skeptic about these phrases. I'm not sure. Rule of law, that phrase? The rule of international law. Okay, yeah. I'm not sure that international law has ever been the prime arbiter of relations between states. Relations between states are and always have been governed by power. We've tried to temper that occasionally, and the whole system of the international system since 1945 has been designed to temper that. And it has succeeded on occasions. I'm skeptical, but I'm not cynical. You know, I mean, I wish it did succeed, and I hope it would succeed more. And I think it's worth sustaining it so far as we can. But we have to be very clear. The world, in the end, is determined by power, and it always has been like that, and it always will be, in my humble opinion. David Blair, our Chief Foreign Affairs commentator. That's all for today's episode of Battle Lines. We'll be back again on Friday. Until then, goodbye.
Battle Lines is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles and hosted by me, Venetia Rainey, and Roland Oliphant. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battle Lines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it really helps others find the show. To stay on top of all of our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign up to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. You can get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. The producer is Peter Shevlin. The executive producer is Louisa Wells.